compared with previous two speeches, my speech might be very bad, maybe even worse than my haircut. And that was the most terrible experience in my life ever. So by the end of August in 2016, one morning, I was woken up by a phone call from a girl called Susan, a long-lost friend of mine. I picked up the phone. I was astonished to hear her weak voice saying, "Rick, I need your help. I want to kill myself again." I was overwhelmed by this sudden panic, and I was trying to figure out a way to save her. But I realized that I had no other options. And at least I needed to stop her for the moment. So I said, "Okay, since now you have come for my help, you won't kill yourself, at least before you get my help, right? So I need you to come to Shanghai by this weekend, and let's have a talk." To be honest, I had no idea what to do, but that was the only option that I could choose. So 2 days later, she came to Shanghai. We met each other at the airport, and I directly took her to the bund. I was about to take her on a tour around Shanghai. Maybe, perhaps, I thought that could ease her feelings somehow. But it turned out to be until we sat at one of those stairs at the bund did we start to talk about the real problems that had been haunting her for several years. There I began to understand her stories. I began to know her self-narrated stories of her past experiences. When Susan was a sophomore student, her father died of a heart attack, and of course several successful treatments had been already conducted, and it was already safe for her father to come back home to rest. However, that was an ordinary day, an ordinary morning. Susan was sleeping in a bed, suffering a pain from her period, because she was suffering a period, and she didn't want to get up. Her mom came back from outside, from an early exercise. She didn't bring the keys with her. She knocked at the doors. And the reason why she didn't bring the keys with her was that because she was doing morning exercise and she was wearing a pair of pants without pockets. And I was surprised. I was surprised that Susan was telling this story in such a specific and detailed fashion. But it seems that if she was trying to justify something. So Susan was lying in bed. She was sleeping. And painful and sleepy, she didn't want to get up to open the door for her mom. While she heard that there was someone moving next room, which is her father's room. She knew that her father was awake, and she waited for her father to open the door for her mom. However, the knocking was just getting louder and louder, and there was no movement anymore. So she got up, opened the door of the room, only to find out her dad dead in the living room because of a heart attack. Well, I believe that most of us have experienced similar situations in our daily life. Sometimes we just don't want to get up, we just want to lie in bed for a few more seconds. Don't want to go to work, don't want to go to school for morning classes, or something like that. It's very, very not a big deal, but the cost for Susan was too much. She couldn't bear it at all because the attribution she made was that she killed her beloved father. She was the murderer of her father because of her laziness, because she didn't want to get up to help her dad. I was astonished to hear this story, and the narrative of hers ended up like this. Several months before we met in Shanghai, he had already committed several suicide attempts, luckily saved by her mother and a lack of knowledge. However, at the bar, he was sitting beside me, and she said, "Rick, I still want to kill myself. I couldn't get out. I didn't know what to do. I know it's wrong, but I missed my dad so much. And if I had killed myself, perhaps that's the only way I could see him again." And that's the attribution. Nevertheless, at the very moment after she finished her story, I began to make it clear, and perhaps, I thought, all of the narratives, all of the experiences, all of the self-narrated stories all came down to a single point. The point is that she just wanted to see her father. And the only way to see her father in heaven was to kill herself. And that's the end of her story. That's the end of the story that she told herself. She had been telling herself for the past 2 years. And there, I decided to engage. I decided to rewrite her story. I started with several very simple questions for which she could answer with a yes. I started with, Susan, do you believe in ghosts? And of course, she said, yes, I do. She was still crying very sadly, tears all up in the eyes. And I said, do you believe that the ghost of your father is right now living in the heaven above, watching over you? And of course, I do. And then I said, you miss him so much, right? You miss him so much that you want to see him right now, right here. And she said, yes, I do. And then I raised the key question. The very question that changed almost everything. Because I realized that all her narratives ended up here. But the story is not completed, right? So I raised the key question. I said, okay, Susan, now you kill yourself. Right now, right here. You meet your dad. That's your story. But tell me, Susan, what is the first thing that you want to say to your father? She was still crying, but she became silent. Tell me, Susan, what is the first thing that you're trying to tell your father? I kept asking the same question for 3 times, and she just couldn't respond. And finally she said, well, I have never thought of this question before. I knew I was very close. I knew I was very close to success of saving a life. She had never thought of this question, and she would never be able to without the help of a third party. And I took one step further. I said, okay, you cannot just tell your dad, Dad, I just murdered myself at home and now I can see you. You don't want him another heart attack, do you? And she laughed. She laughed with tears. And I know I succeeded. And I said, promise me, Susan, promise me you will live. You will live until one day you meet your dad. The first thing that came out of her mind was, Dad, I've had a wonderful life. And of course she promised me. No more words, a life was saved. Well, I saved Susan by changing and rewriting a narrative of her past experiences and of her self-narrated stories. Because our past is simply a story that we have been telling ourselves. And here comes the concept of narrative therapy. The concept of narrative therapy is a form of psychotherapy that seeks to help people identify their true values, so that they can confront whatever problems they may face in the future. The therapist, which was me, myself, in that story, the therapist seeks to help people co-author a new narrative about themselves, or say a different narrative about themselves, by investigating their personal history. In Susan's personal history, she was the murderer of her father, and the only way that she could see her father was to kill herself. So that's why she attempted several times of suicide, and she began to think that was the only way to do it. And I completed the story. I rewrote the story. Well, I gave her a new identity. An identity that engaged in her own personal story and even changed it. Identity is very important. In narrative therapy, the approach aims not to conflate people's problems and people's identities with the problems they may face in the future or the mistakes they have made. Rather, the approach aims to avoid a kind of modernist, essentialist notion of the self that lead people to believe that there is a biologically determined true self or true nature, however there is not. In narrative therapy, the concept of identity as a primarily social element can be changed according to the choices we make, and I merely gave her a different choice. So this is how I saved Susan. I changed her from a guilty little girl to a responsible daughter. promise to live until her father won't be sad but happy when meeting her again. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the power of human voice. This is the power of conversation. Perhaps it is the most powerful sound in the world that often changes the course of history, like the Declaration of Independence or Martin Luther King's speech or Bible. And sometimes it also changes the course of an individual history. Because there's one thing that only human voice is able to do, that makes all the difference. We tell stories. We tell stories that shape who we are, what we do. We tell stories that save lives.